They said Mazi Alaadimma's rent was cheap because he had a good heart. But the truth, his kindness was a trap, and the mirrors in his tenants' bedrooms were his cages. Welcome to Tales at Dusk, the archive of rich African tales. Okokomaiko was never quiet. Even before the sun stretched its orange fingers across the rooftops, the sounds had already started. The blaring horns of Danfo buses, traders dragging open their shop shutters, the smell of fried akara floating through the dusty air. And there, right in the middle of all that chaos, stood an old compound painted in fading cream and green. 12 flats, 2 bedrooms each, neatly aligned around a central courtyard. The owner of that compound was a man everyone in the neighborhood knew, Mazi Alaadimma. To the eyes of strangers, Mazi was the kind of elder every tenant prayed for, calm, soft-spoken, always smiling with his gap-toothed grin. His gray hair was neatly combed back, his white native attire spotless, and his walking stick, polished wood, shining like something sacred. He was in his early 80s, but his steps were surprisingly firm. People used to joke that age was afraid to touch him. Everyone loved Mazi. If your generator broke down, he'd lend you his. If your rent was late, he'd smile and say, "Pay when business starts to smile at you again." If your child was sick, he'd drop small money for drugs, no questions asked. And yet, despite being the kindest landlord in all of Lagos, his rent was unbelievably cheap. While others in Okokomaiko charged the price of gold, Mazi charged so little that people whispered, maybe he just didn't care about money anymore. But the tenants stayed. Oh, they stayed. Because Mazi's house wasn't just affordable, it felt safe, peaceful, almost too peaceful. Inside every flat, the walls were clean, the water always ran, and the light bill somehow stayed low. Even in Lagos, where NEPA liked to disappear without notice. But there was one thing all the tenants had in common. Each flat had a large mirror fixed on the wall of the main bedroom, a tall, silver-rimmed mirror that caught your reflection just right. Mazi said it was for beauty and blessing. He even warned, gently but firmly, that no one should ever remove or replace the mirror. "No need to touch it," he'd say with a chuckle. "It has been there longer than even me. Leave it, and it will leave you in peace." The tenants laughed and agreed. Who would argue with such an old man? And besides, they thought, what harm could a mirror do? Abeg make I no use because of mirror loss this cheap house-o. But Mazi knew the truth. Late at night, when the tenants were asleep, he would walk around the courtyard barefoot, whispering under his breath. He would pause at each door, eyes half closed, feeling the quiet hum that pulsed from the walls. Because for him, those walls were alive. And inside each bedroom mirror, unseen to everyone else, shimmered the souls of 12 people, their laughter, their dreams, their destinies. Each mirror a window, each tenant a sacrifice, and every morning as the sun rose, Mazi would breathe in deeply and smile, refreshed, strong, alive. For the mirrors were his life, and as long as they stood unbroken, so would he. His house was old but clean, wooden furniture that smelled of camphor, portraits of long-dead relatives on the walls, and in the center of his bedroom stood his own mirror, the biggest of them all. Taller than him, framed in carved ebony, it shimmered even when there was no light. Every night Mazi would sit before it, wearing a white wrapper, holding a small clay bowl filled with palm oil and something darker, something that looked like blood. He would speak softly to the mirror, calling names only he understood. And in that glass, faint shadows would begin to move. Faces of men and women, tired and lifeless, trapped in reflection. Those were his tenants. Or rather, what was left of them. Their joy, their progress, their chi, all gently drawn from them through the mirrors that hung in their rooms. And each time he chanted, Mazi's eyes would clear, his back would straighten, his wrinkles would fade just a little. The mirrors were his secret harvest, his way of living forever. By day he remained the kind old landlord, smiling and giving small gifts, attending birthdays and weddings in the compound. But every smile was part of the act, a mask for the man who fed on the destiny of others. Sometimes one of the tenants would notice something odd, but the cheap rent kept them from complaining. A businessman who once made good sales would suddenly start struggling. A tailor whose shop used to boom would find her hands trembling when she sewed. A mechanic would fall sick for no reason, energy drained, hope gone. But they never suspected Mazi. After all, how could the man who brought you food be the same one feeding on your soul? And so life in the compound went on, peaceful on the surface, rotten underneath, until the day fate decided to shake things up. The day Iforma, a 48-year-old unmarried woman and one of the oldest tenants in Flat 6, had discovered Mazi Alaadimma's dark secret. But before she could reveal the truth, Mazi struck her dead, and the mirror swallowed her soul, waiting silently for the next. 3 weeks after Iforma's quiet burial, Flat 6 stood empty, its mirror still hanging untouched, faintly fogged as though holding on to her last breath. The other tenants whispered about it. Some said Ifeoma's spirit still lingered. Others claimed they heard footsteps in the night. But Mazi Alaadimma wasn't worried. He only smiled each time he passed that room, tapping his walking stick on the ground 3 times before walking away. He knew another soul would come soon enough. The mirror was waiting. Then came a young family searching for better life. Mr. Kanayo was in his early 40s, tall, hard-working, a man trying to build a better life for his family. His wife, Ngozi, was a gentle woman with kind eyes and a laugh that filled the air. They had 2 children, a curious little boy, Chibuike, and his younger sister, Adama, who never stayed still for a second. From the moment they arrived, Mazi welcomed them warmly. "Ah, my new family," he said with his signature smile. "This house has been waiting for people like you." He showed them every corner of the house like a proud grandfather. When Ngozi noticed the mirror in the bedroom, she paused. It was old, large, heavy, with a strange shimmer that made her reflection look different, almost tired. "Mazi," she asked, "please, can we change this mirror? Maybe hang our own?" He chuckled softly, waving his hand. "No, my daughter. That mirror is part of the house. It brings peace and unity. Trust me, you will come to love it." Ngozi didn't argue. She smiled politely, but something about that mirror unsettled her. That night, as they unpacked, little Adama stood before it, tilting her head and giggling. "Mummy," she whispered, "the auntie inside is smiling at me." Ngozi frowned. "Which auntie?" But when she looked, she saw only her daughter's reflection, nothing else. She shook her head. "You're just tired. Come and sleep." Later that night, as the family drifted into deep sleep, the mirror in the corner gleamed faintly in the darkness, pulsing like a living thing. And in Mazi Alaadimma's room across the compound, he smiled in his sleep, whispering to no one in particular, "Welcome home, Flat 6. Life in Mazi Alaadimma's compound seemed normal again. The new tenants, the Kanayo family, settled quickly. Mr. Kanayo left for work early each morning in his small Toyota, greeting Mazi with a respectful bow. Ngozi made friends with the women in the compound, and their laughter often echoed in the evenings as they cooked by the corridor. The children filled the air with giggles and energy. From the outside, everything looked perfect. But inside Flat 6, the nights were different. It started small, a faint chill whenever Ngozi entered the bedroom, a feeling that someone was watching when she stood before the mirror. Once, she thought she saw her own reflection blink after she had already turned away. At first, she said nothing. She didn't want to sound paranoid, but every night she'd wake up sweating, feeling as though something was moving near the wall where the mirror hung. One evening, as she folded clothes, little Adama began giggling again. "Mummy, see? She's waving." Ngozi froze. "Who?" "The auntie inside the mirror." Ngozi's heart skipped. She walked quickly to the wall and stared into the glass. Nothing. Just her own tired face. Later that night, she told her husband, "Kanayo, that mirror. It's strange. I don't like it." Her husband smiled wearily. "Ngozi, abeg leave matter. You know how Lego stress can play with your mind. Maybe it's just imagination." She sighed, letting it go, but unease lingered. Meanwhile, in another part of the compound, Mazi Alaadimma sat quietly in his room. Before him, his own great mirror shimmered softly. The air smelled faintly of burning camphor and palm oil, and as he chanted in a voice barely above a whisper, shadows began to dance across the glass. He could see his tenants, their dreams, their fears, their laughter. And then he smiled faintly. The new family was glowing, full of life and energy. Their presence made his reflection younger, stronger. But suddenly the image flickered. The child, little Adama, was standing too close to her mirror. Mazi frowned. "No, not the child. She's too innocent," he muttered. Yet he could sense the girl's curiosity and the mirror's hunger. "The mirror accepts them," he whispered. But the girl, she must not see too much. Saturday mornings in the compound were usually full of life. Children playing with worn-out footballs, women scrubbing clothes, the smell of stew drifting through open windows. It was the kind of noise that made the place feel like family. That morning was no different. Ngozi was sweeping the corridor while her husband fixed a leaking pipe in the bathroom. The children were inside, laughing and chasing each other around the room, until laughter turned into a scream. There was a crash. Ngozi dropped her broom and ran inside. On the floor, shards of the bedroom mirror glittered like ice. Little Chibuike stood frozen, eyes wide, a small ball still rolling beside his feet. I didn't mean to, Mummy." "The ball hit it," he cried. Ngozi rushed to him, checking for injuries. Thank God, not even a scratch. But as she turned toward the wall, she felt a wave of cold air sweep through the room. The light flickered. For a split second, she could have sworn she heard a deep groan, like the house itself had cried out in pain. Across the compound, Mazi Alaadimma jerked awake. The mirror in his own room trembled violently. A sharp pain stabbed his chest, and he gasped, clutching his walking stick for balance. "No," he whispered, voice trembling. "Someone has broken the link." Within minutes, he was standing at the Kanayo's door, eyes burning with fury. The gentle, smiling old man was gone, replaced by something fierce, something ancient. His voice thundered through the flat. "Who broke my mirror?" Everyone froze. Ngozi stammered, "Papa, it was an accident. The children were just playing." "Accident?" His eyes darkened. "Do you know what you've done?" Kanayo came in, confused but defensive. "Mazi, abeg, no vex. It was a mistake. We'll replace it, even buy a finer one." But Mazi's voice cut him off, cold and sharp. "No mirror can replace what you've destroyed." He turned, staring at the shattered pieces on the floor, his face pale, hands trembling. Then he whispered something, words no one understood, before walking away slowly, leaning heavily on his stick. That night, the compound felt different. No laughter, no noise, just silence. Even the air seemed heavy, pressing down on everyone's chest. Ngozi prayed quietly before bed, glancing at the empty spot where the mirror once hung. She couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible had been set loose. Days passed. They bought a new mirror, same size, same frame, hoping to calm Mazi's anger. But when Kanayo tried to hang it, Mazi came again, his eyes hard as stone. "Remove it," he ordered. "That space will never hold a mirror again." Kanayo was shocked. "But why, sir? It's just a— Remove it." His voice echoed like thunder, and for a moment it felt as though the entire compound shuddered with him. That night, Mazi sat alone before his great mirror. But the reflection was wrong. His face was pale, his body weak. The connection had been broken, and for the first time in years, Mazi felt fear. The compound was never the same after that day. It wasn't just the silence, it was the feeling. The kind that crawls under your skin and makes you look over your shoulder even when you're alone. The Kanayos tried to move on. They kept their distance from Mazi Alaadimma, greeting him only out of respect. But everyone could see the change in him. His once bright white clothes looked dull, his eyes sunken, and his steps slower. He rarely smiled now. At night, people whispered they could hear him talking to himself. Others claimed to see him pacing the courtyard barefoot, staring at doors, muttering strange words. And though no one dared say it aloud, everyone knew the trouble started the day that mirror broke. Soon, small misfortunes began to spread through the compound. A tailor in flat 3 lost all her customers in 1 week. The generator of a trader in flat 8 caught fire for no reason. Children fell sick and got better only after leaving the compound for days. But the worst was yet to come, and it began in flat 6. It started with little Chibuike. At first, he complained that his legs felt heavy. Ngozi thought it was malaria, so she gave him medicine. But by the next morning, the boy couldn't stand. His legs lay motionless, as though they no longer belonged to him. Panic spread quickly. Hospitals found nothing wrong. Doctors said his nerves were fine, his bones perfect. Yet the child could not move. Ngozi cried for days, and Kanayo was shattered. Out of desperation, he went to Mazi, pleading for prayers, still not suspecting the man's hand in it. But Mazi only looked at him with blank eyes. "I don't know anything about your child's ailment, but maybe, just maybe, this is what happens," he said softly, "when sacred things are broken." Kanayo froze. Sacred things? It was an accident. But Mazi had already turned his back, closing his door gently, ending the conversation like a final judgment. The other tenants whispered. They began to avoid flat 6, muttering prayers whenever they passed by. But rent in Lagos wasn't cheap, and somehow, even with all the fear, no one ever truly left. Something in that compound held them there. As nights grew darker, Ngozi started hearing faint whispers near the broken wall where the mirror once hung. Sometimes it sounded like her son's name, other times like her own heartbeat echoing outside her body. One night, as she sat beside Chibuike's bed praying, she heard footsteps on the corridor, slow, dragging, deliberate. She looked through the window and saw Mazi walking past their door, barefoot, murmuring in a language she didn't understand. And though his eyes were closed, he turned his head toward her window and smiled. Ngozi's blood ran cold. That night she held her children close, whispering the only words she knew. "God, whatever this is, please deliver us." But even heaven seemed silent at first. By the 3rd week, little Chibuike was still lying on that same bed, still weak, eyes full of confusion. The once lively boy who ran through the compound laughing now stared blankly at the ceiling, asking, "Mummy, when will my legs wake up?" Each time, Ngozi would force a smile and say, "Soon, my son, very soon." But deep down, she was breaking. Kanayo was a man torn between logic and faith. He had spent all their savings on hospitals, scans, and medicines. Nothing worked. The doctors called it psychological paralysis. But Ngozi knew better. This wasn't medicine. This was spiritual. One hot Sunday afternoon, as Ngozi sat outside fanning her son, her old friend from their former compound, Mama Blessing, an elderly woman known for her deep faith, paid a visit. She was shocked seeing little Chibuike couldn't move his legs. She whispered, "My daughter, This one past hospital matter. There's a man of God I know, Pastor Jide. The kind of prayers he prays, evil spirits tremble. At first, Kanayo was skeptical, but that night, after another sleepless stretch of watching his child cry, he gave in. "Bring him," he said quietly. "Let him come." 2 days later, Pastor Jide arrived. He was not a loud man, tall, calm, with eyes that carried both peace and fire. From the moment he stepped into the compound, he stopped and looked around slowly. The air itself seemed to tighten. "Who owns this place?" he asked softly. "Mazi Alaadimma," Kanayo replied. The pastor nodded slowly. There is blood crying from these walls." He walked into flat 6, stood before the spot where the broken mirror once hung, and touched the wall gently. A chill swept through the room. Then he whispered, "Lord, open my eyes." What he saw made him tremble. Behind the wall was not just concrete, it was a portal of trapped light and shadow. Faces, faint, transparent, moved slowly inside, their eyes empty, their mouths open in silent screams. The pastor staggered back, praying in tongues. Ngozi fell to her knees, crying. "Man of God, please help us." He turned to her. "Your landlord is not who he appears to be. He has bound this house with mirrors of divination. Through them he draws the destinies of all who live here. That broken mirror." He paused. "It broke his covenant. That's why your child is suffering." Ngozi covered her mouth in shock. Kanayo clenched his fists, fury boiling in his chest. "That old man, that kind old man?" Pastor Jide placed a hand on his shoulder. "Be careful. This battle is not with man, but with the spirit that owns him. But God is greater." That evening, the pastor gathered the family and began prayers. As his voice rose, the lights flickered. Wind slammed against the windows, though. Outside, the air was still. A low hum began to echo from the other flats, mirrors vibrating faintly as though alive. And in his room, Mazi Alaadimma snapped awake. Sweat poured down his face. He could feel it. Someone was challenging him. He stood before his great mirror, eyes blazing. "No one touches my mirrors," he growled. His reflection smiled back, mocking, alive. Then, all around the compound, dogs began barking. The ground trembled, and in that moment a spiritual war had begun. The pastor's voice grew stronger. "In the name of Jesus, every spirit hiding in this place, I command you, reveal yourself." The moment he said that, a cold wind blew through the room, scattering papers and curtains. Ngozi screamed, clutching her children as the lantern flame bent sideways but did not go out. The air now carried whispers, faint, unearthly whispers, as though the mirrors in every flat were talking to each other. From outside, other tenants began waking up. Doors creaked open, voices murmured. People peeked through windows, confused, afraid. Then it happened. A loud, sharp crack echoed from one of the rooms down the corridor. Then another, and another. Mirrors began shattering on their own, one after the other, across the entire compound, 12 in total. Screams erupted from every corner as glass rained down like ice. But inside flat 6, Pastor Jide stood firm, his voice thundering through the chaos. "Every chain of darkness, break!" The floor trembled. A final mirror shattered with a sound like thunder. And then silence. Absolute silence. Ngozi looked at her son and gasped. Chibuike's eyes were open. He blinked slowly, then sat up, his voice weak but clear. "Mummy, my legs, I can move them." Tears burst from her eyes as she screamed with joy, hugging him tight. Kanayo fell to his knees, shaking, whispering, "Thank you, Jesus. Thank you." But the victory was not just theirs. Across the compound, other tenants suddenly felt lighter, as if a heavy hand had been lifted off their lives. Some wept, Some shouted praises. The air, once thick with fear, now felt clean. And far away in his room, Mazi Alaadimma's mirror, the biggest of them all, began to tremble violently. Its reflection twisted, showing faces screaming in release. The connection was breaking. The power was dying. Then the mirror cracked straight down the middle, a single perfect line, and everything went still. The entire compound shook. Dogs barked in the distance. A strange silence followed, heavy, sacred, almost unreal. Then, from the far end of the compound, a deep wail tore through the night. It wasn't a normal cry, it was the sound of a soul in agony. It came from Mazi Alaadimma's house. Tenants rushed out with lanterns and phone lights, whispering prayers as they gathered in the courtyard. The old man's door burst open. Mazi stumbled out barefoot, his wrapper half loose, sweat pouring down his wrinkled face. His eyes were wild, not with anger this time, but fear. Pure, naked fear. He fell to his knees right there in the middle of the compound. His hands trembled as he pointed toward his house. "The mirrors," he cried, his voice cracking. "They've turned against me." Nobody moved. Even the boldest tenants stood frozen, watching the calm, generous landlord unravel before their eyes. "They were my life," Mazi gasped. "My strength. My youth. I took only a little from each of you, just enough to live, just enough to stay strong." People began murmuring. Kanayo stepped forward slowly, his face pale. "You mean all this time?" "Yes," Mazi screamed. "Yes. Those mirrors were my covenant. I fed from your destinies, your blessings, your joy. You prospered for a while, but never too much, because the rest came to me." He began to sob, beating his chest. "I didn't want to die. The spirits promised me long life if I kept the mirrors whole." The crowd gasped, some shouting "Jesus," others covering their mouths in horror. Mama Blessing whispered, "God have mercy." Mazi's voice grew weaker. "They warned me. If any mirror was broken, the link would break, and I would fade." He clutched his chest, eyes darting wildly. "I tried to hold on, but the boy broke it." "The boy," his words trailed off into a choking cough. Pastor Jide stepped forward, calm and firm. "Mazi, confess everything. Let your soul find peace." Mazi's body trembled. "Iforma," he whispered. "She found out. She tried to remove her mirror. I made her sick until she died." Gasps rippled through the tenants. "I didn't want to kill her, but I couldn't let her go." "None of you could go." He began weeping like a child. "The mirrors gave me life, and now they have taken it back." Suddenly, a loud crack echoed from inside his room. The great mirror, his last, shattered into countless pieces, scattering light across the compound. Mazi screamed once, clutching his chest, and collapsed. Silence. Pastor Jide knelt beside him, but it was too late. Mazi Alaadimma's body lay still, eyes open, a faint smile frozen on his face, like a man finally released from his curse. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Pastor Jide rose slowly, lifting his eyes to the heavens. "What was hidden in darkness," he said softly, "has been brought to light. The chains are broken. Tears filled many eyes. The tenants began to pray, some in fear, others in gratitude. The air felt lighter than it had in years, as though the compound itself had taken a deep, cleansing breath. In that moment, Mazi's house, once filled with the energy of 12 trapped souls, became quiet, truly quiet. By dawn, the compound was quiet, unnaturally quiet, the kind of silence that follows a storm. Heavy, hollow, and uncertain. Mazi Alaadimma's lifeless body lay in his corridor for hours before anyone dared go near. No one wept. No one moved to touch him. The tenants stood at a distance, whispering prayers, crossing themselves, still trying to make sense of what they had witnessed. Pastor Jide gathered everyone in the compound. The morning sun crept slowly over the walls, lighting up the shattered glass scattered across the ground. It sparkled like diamonds or tears. "Children of God," the pastor said quietly, "the evil that ruled this place has fallen, but this ground is not ordinary soil. It has drunk too much darkness. You must all leave, every one of you." The tenants exchanged uneasy glances. "Leave?" someone asked. "We've lived here for years." "Not anymore," Pastor Jide interrupted. "This place was built with blood." "You can't rebuild peace on cursed ground." At first, they hesitated. Rent in Lagos was no joke. But within days, strange things began happening again. Doors slammed shut by themselves. Whispers echoed in empty rooms. Children refused to sleep, saying they saw shadows standing beside the walls at night. One evening, Ngozi found her son, Chibuike, staring at a shard of broken mirror he'd picked from the ground. "Mummy," he said softly, "the old man's face is inside." Ngozi snatched it away and threw it out the window. That next morning they packed their things and left the compound, not waiting for their rent to expire. Word spread fast. One by one, every tenant moved out. Flat after flat, room after room, the compound emptied, until the only sound that remained was the creak of rusty gates and the whisper of wind through cracked windows. Weeks passed. Grass began to grow tall in the courtyard. No one rented the place again. Even agents refused to advertise it. "That compound," they'd say, shaking their heads, "leave Iget's story." And so it stood, Mazi Alaadimma's 12-flat house in Okokomaiko, abandoned, silent, its walls still holding the echo of lives once trapped inside. Some nights, passers-by swore they saw a faint light flicker from one of the rooms, or caught a glimpse of movement behind a dusty window pane. But by the time they looked again, there was nothing, only the faint reflection of the moon on what remained of a broken mirror. Because though the mirrors were gone, their memory remained. And in Okokomaiko, they say, when the wind blows just right, you can still hear Mazi's voice whispering through the compound, calm, gentle, and haunting. "Owe the rent, but leave the mirror alone." Moral: in life, evil often hides behind kindness. Not every smile is pure, and not every generous hand is clean. Some gifts come with unseen strings, and some blessings with buried costs. Be careful where you live, who you trust, and what you welcome into your home, because sometimes what looks ordinary could be feeding on your destiny. So tell me, if you were one of Mazi Alaadimma's tenants, would you have dared to break the mirror? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story shook you, like, share, and subscribe for more chilling tales that make you think twice about the world you see and the things you don't.